Disclaimer: this book is a fictionalized account of Stephen King's life. While inspired by the author's real-life experiences and career, the characters' narrative events and dialogue have been dramatized and imagined by the author. This is not intended to be a factual biography, but rather a creative interpretation exploring the writer's possible influences and motivations through fictional scenarios. Though some real individuals and events are referenced, their portrayal here is entirely fictional and not meant to reflect actual occurrences. This is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, actual places and events is purely coincidental. Please enjoy this fictional biography as an act of creative speculation and literary imagination, not an authoritative account of Stephen King's life story. The Dark Origins of Stephen King. Chapter 1. The chill autumn wind howled through the narrow streets of Durham, Maine, sending a flurry of dead leaves skittering across the cracked pavement. A young boy named Stevie King, no more than 5 years old, shivered as he made his way home from kindergarten class. He pulled his threadbare coat tighter, glancing about with wary eyes. Strange shadows seemed to flit at the edge of his vision, while the skeletal branches of oak trees appeared to reach for him with grasping fingers. Stevie hurried on, his overlarge boots clomping noisily. Rounding the corner onto Derry Street, Stevie glimpsed an eerie green glow shining from a storm drain. He paused, pulse quickening. The light wavered and danced, as though beckoning him closer. Against his better judgment, Stevie approached the drain and peered into its dark depths. He thought he could hear whispers and faint giggles from somewhere far below. A pair of glowing yellow eyes flashed suddenly in the shadows of the sewer, making Stevie gasp and stumble back. The eyes vanished as quickly as they had come, leaving Stevie shaken. He tore his gaze away and continued his walk home. When Stevie arrived at the weather-beaten house he shared with his mother Ruth and absentee father Ali, he was relieved to find the doors and windows intact. Lately there had been strange incidents around town, pets mutilated, possessions mysteriously disappearing from homes. Stevie's overactive imagination envisioned ghouls and monsters lurking behind every corner, despite his mother's assurances that he was safe. He knew deep down that the shadows held secrets no adult could see. There was an unseen world lurking beneath the sleepy surface of his small town, filled with magic, menacing things that went bump in the night. And one day, Stevie would illuminate those dark mysteries in his writings for all the world to shudder at. Chapter 2. Stevie sat alone in the far corner of Mrs. Bollinger's first-grade classroom, sorting through a box of battered old horror comics and dog-eared paperbacks. While the other children played rowdily during recess, Stevie preferred to lose himself in tales of the weird and macabre. Ever since he could read, he'd spent hours devouring the scary stories of Poe and Lovecraft, filled with doomed explorers, brooding castles, and eldritch abominations from beyond the stars. The vivid imagery and rich prose ignited his imagination and made his heart thrill with terror and delight. One dreary autumn afternoon, Stevie became utterly absorbed in an anthology of classic horror when suddenly a shadow fell over his desk. He looked up with a start to see Mrs. Bollinger frowning down at him disapprovingly. "Stephen," she admonished, "must you always read these horrid things? I confiscate a new ghastly book from you every week." She held up his dog-eared copy of Tales from the Twilight Zone. You'd be better off going outside with the others, getting some fresh air, she continued. Stevie glumly shook his head, mumbling something about preferring monsters to people. Mrs. Bollinger sighed deeply. Very well, but no more screaming out loud when the stories frighten you. With that, she handed the book back and left Stevie to his morbid diversions. After school, Stevie stopped by the public library to return a stack of Goosebumps novels. The head librarian, Miss Wexley, smiled kindly down at him. My goodness, you've finished all these already. What a voracious reader you are, Stephen. Stevie nodded enthusiastically. I love scary stories more than anything, he replied. Miss Wexley laughed. Well, my boy, you've come to the right town for that. Durham has its fair share of ghost tales and bizarre legends. Have you heard of the haunted house on Neibolt Street, or the abandoned asylum on the outskirts of Derry? Stevie's eyes went wide with excitement. Miss Wexley leaned down and said in a low voice, If you're brave enough, Stephen, those places may just reveal their secrets to you. The truth is never far from the surface in Durham, for those willing to look. A tingle went down Stevie's spine at the thought of uncovering the town's shadowy folklore. He would start his explorations soon. Durham's darkness called to him. Chapter 3. Stevie stared up at the ivy-covered buildings of the University of Maine campus bustling with activity. He had just moved into his cramped dormitory room in Augusta Hall that would be his home for the next 4 years. His mother, Ruth, hugged him tightly. I'm so proud of you, Stephen. You got a full scholarship. Stevie nodded, fighting back nervousness. He knew college represented his chance to fully pursue writing, his true passion. After Ruth left, Stevie began pinning up posters for horror movies and metal bands, making the space feel more like home. He started work on his first short story for Intro to Creative Writing class, typing furiously on his clunky word processor late into the night. Stevie's protagonists tended to be isolated misfits like himself, encountering the bizarre and supernatural in humdrum everyday settings, malevolent angels in roadside diners, secret portals hidden in laundromats, ancient eldritch deities awakening beneath the local Walmart. His classmates were impressed by his prolific output and vivid imagination, though a few complained that his subject matter gave them nightmares. Professor Aldridge, who taught advanced fiction writing, became an early mentor. You have a real gift for making the fantastical seem viscerally real, he told Stevie. With refinement, you could be a major voice in speculative fiction. Stevie spent many late nights in the basement of the campus library, poring over dusty folklore collections and newspaper archives, seeking real-life tales of the paranormal to inspire his writing. He learned of unsolved murders, ghost sightings, old asylum escapes, and other chilling local legends that catalyzed new story ideas. Though lonely at times, Stevie felt he was finally where he belonged. Amidst the shadowy stacks, creativity flowed from his imagination like blood from the Overlook Hotel's elevator doors. Chapter 4. The clanging of the textile mill provided an industrial soundtrack as Stevie walked home after another grueling double shift. He had dropped out of college after 2 years, unable to keep up with tuition. Now 22, he was back in Durham working a dead-end job at the factory. Life had seemed so full of potential in university. Where did things go wrong? At home, Stevie found another thin rejection slip waiting in the mailbox. His stories had been circulating for months to little interest. The few personal responses from editors all said the same thing. Too graphic and bizarre for our readers' taste. Stevie sighed, crumpling the slip in his fist. Later that night, Stevie met his friends Randall, Bev, and Petty at Murphy's Tavern, their usual watering hole. Between beers, Stevie glumly recounted his latest rejection. Maybe I should just give up writing. No one wants to read my crazy stories. His friends objected loudly. Are you kidding? Your stuff is incredible, said Beth. Randall clapped him on the shoulder. You can't quit, man. You were meant to be a writer. The world needs your twisted imagination. Their encouragement rekindled Stevie's spirit. He resolved to keep honing his craft and submitting faithfully, come what may. A few weeks later came a miracle. Angle Street Press, a small independent publisher, sent Stevie a letter accepting his novel Carrie for publication. Stevie ran deliriously around the house, holding the letter above his head like Olympic gold. That night called for the hardest drinking and wildest celebrating Durham had ever witnessed. At last, Stevie's weird tales would reach an audience hungry for them. His moment in the spotlight was at hand. Chapter 5. Stevie arrived for his first book, signing at Foster's Books, to find a lengthy queue already stretched down the block. He could scarcely believe so many people had come just for him. The owner greeted him effusively. Your novel's only been out a week, and I'm already selling out. Horror fans just can't get enough. Stevie grinned, settling behind the signing table. As fans slid well-worn copies of Carrie across the table, Stevie inscribed personal messages and drew gory doodles to make each unique. Staring into their smiling faces, he saw kindred spirits, fellow outcasts and misfits who found solace in the dark, the ghoulish, the forbidden. Through his book, he was giving voice to their unspoken fears and desires. One fan, a timid teenage girl, lingered as Stevie signed her copy. Your writing is so powerful, she said softly. Carrie's agony and resentment. It's like you saw right into my high school experience. I've never felt so understood. Her words moved Stevie deeply. Changing lives through imagination and empathy. That was the magic of storytelling. Later that night, Stevie met Randall and the old gang at Murphy's to celebrate. They raised toasts over and over to his long-awaited success. Randall threw an arm around Stevie's shoulders. We always knew you were destined for greatness, man. This is just the beginning. Stevie smiled, feeling he could conquer the world. With Carrie flying off shelves, publishers hungry for more, and fans multiplying daily, wild critical and commercial triumph seemed assured. He would plunge ever deeper into society's darkness and dredge up what lurked there, battering minds and courting outrage. His twisted visions would not be ignored again. Chapter 6. Stevie strode into the Angle Street press offices, clutching a leather satchel, eyes bloodshot from another all-night writing bender. He'd produced 3 complete novels in just 2 years since Carrie took off. His publisher, Mike Hatlin, greeted him with a hearty handshake. Let's see what you've got for us this time, you machine. Stevie handed over the satchel. It's called Salem's Lot Vampires slowly taking over a small Maine town. I think it could be huge. Hatlin leafed through the manuscript, whistling. I love it already. We'll fast-track this to stores for Halloween. Stevie's star had ascended meteorically since Carrie. He was now a ubiquitous best-selling author and bona fide household name. Every new book spawned ravenous critical and popular buzz. Horror fans couldn't get enough, while literary critics analyzed his works for hidden meaning. Talk shows clamored for interviews with the genre's dark prince. With fame and royalties pouring in, Stevie bought a Victorian mansion near Durham, dubbed the Redoubt. He wrote compulsively into the night, fueled by nicotine, caffeine, and blasting metal. Every day brought inspiration, bone chilling howl of the wind, the creaking of the old house settling, the skittering of unseen things in the dark. He populated his stories with the dreams and nightmares of suburban dread, of evil lurking behind the mundane. The horrors birthed in the human psyche, not the supernatural, were what terrified most deeply. As Stevie departed the Angle Street offices, Hatlund called out, "Whatever devilish tales you're cooking up in that mansion, keep 'em coming. The fans are insatiable." Stevie just nodded, flashing a grim smile. He would ride his macabre muse all the way into the abyss, where he felt inexorably drawn. Chapter 7. Stevie sat typing furiously by candlelight, thunder crashing outside the study's bay windows. His current novel, The Shining, had consumed him for months. The story of a haunted hotel corrupting a writer resonated deeply, channeling his own isolation and torment since achieving success. Writing possessed Stevie body and soul. Some accused him of selling out, pumping out books too quickly, but Stevie knew otherwise. The words poured from some subconscious reservoir beyond his control. The act of creation seemed mystical, otherworldly, as stories already etched somewhere in the ether, merely waiting for his psychic antenna to snatch them like radio signals. Stevie often entered trance-like fugues while writing, emerging hours later to reread pages covered in scrawled madness. Much seemed the work of another, some primal muse guiding his hand. The twisted tales and damaged characters shadowing his nightmares transferred directly onto the page. By communing with his darkness, Stevie accessed universal fears and desires shared by all. His only goal was to buy time for writing with book sales. Stevie crafted pulp page-turners that nonetheless probed humanity's metaphysical shadows. The line between genre entertainment and high literature mattered not to him. Both sprung from the same creative wellspring. As the skies cleared outside, Stevie finally set down his pen just shy of The Shining's climactic frenzy. He craved nothing but to return to the page, channeling ever darker visions. For he had peered into the abyss inside his characters and seen it peering back. Chapter 8. The deafening music and stifling heat of the Bangor Civic Center assaulted Stevie's senses. He was backstage at a metal festival where he'd been invited as a VIP guest. Stevie loosened his tie and wiped sweat from his brow, grinning. He felt utterly in his element. The wailing guitars and demonic vocals spoke to his soul. "There you are," roared a voice behind him. Randall emerged from the shadows, beer in hand. "Have I got your next stimulant lined up, maestro? This coke is primo stuff, straight from Bolivia." Stevie hesitated. He typically preferred booze to drugs, but tonight felt like a celebration. The wild success Stevie achieved in his 30s proved a siren call to decadence. Gone were the days of scraping by in Durham. He now indulged his voracious appetites. Liquor, pills, cocaine, and women became steady pastimes between writing sessions. The highs fueled his boundless creativity. Trouble came creeping. Missed deadlines, sloppy drafts, arguments with publishers. Alcohol stoked Stevie's rage. Destructive tantrums became common. One night, deep in his cups, Stevie accused his wife Tabby of sabotaging his work. As she hastily packed her bags, his anger turned to shame. But Tabby stayed, knowing the man she loved remained beneath the tempest. Randall encouraged Stevie's excesses, introducing shadier friends and dangerous habits. Late-night parties descended into bacchanals at the Redoubt. Yet Tabby and his children's steadfast loyalty kept Stevie tethered, preventing him from flying off the rails completely. His books remained bestsellers, carrying readers away from mundane lives into worlds of chilling imagination. For their sake, he clung to his gift like a life raft. Stevie stood at the crossroads, hearing his angels and demons beckon. His path forward held only darkness and unknown terrors. With a roar, he strode on stage and threw himself into the maelstrom. Chapter 9. Stevie strolled along the rural road bordering his Maine lake house, enjoying the crisp autumn breeze. His daily walks kept him fit during breaks from writing. A new novel was percolating in his mind, a tale of pets returning from the grave. Suddenly, a large van crested the hill ahead, barreling directly towards Stevie at tremendous speed. In a panic, he leapt into the roadside ditch, but too late. The van broadsided Stevie, flipping his body violently through the air. He crashed down with a sickening thud. As his limp form lay twisted on the pavement, consciousness rapidly ebbed. When Stevie awoke, he found himself in a stark hospital room, body immobilized in traction. Tabby sat anxiously by his bedside. "There was an accident," she said gently. "You've been in a coma for 2 weeks." She explained that a distracted driver had nearly killed him. Bones shattered, organs lacerated, the prognosis dire. In pain and unable to move, Stevie despaired that his writing career was over. But as weeks passed, glimmers of inspiration returned despite the agony. New story ideas came unbidden to mind. Plots flowed faster than Stevie could scribble down notes. It seemed the accident had renovated the primordial wellspring of his creativity. Against all odds, Stevie healed completely after multiple surgeries and therapy. The van crash nearly took his life, but ultimately enhanced his imagination. Shortly after the accident, he completed a draft of Pet Sematary, his most viscerally frightening work yet. When asked later about the ordeal, Stevie explained, "I passed through some magical threshold that day. The places my writing dares to go grew much darker after the light almost went out permanently." Stevie had gazed into the abyss and brought back fresh nightmares to share. Chapter 10. Stevie stepped from the cab in front of the Angle Street press offices, pausing to take in the familiar sight. Despite achieving fame far beyond this modest building, he retained his loyalty to the publishers who gave him his first break. Inside, Mike Hatlund greeted Stevie enthusiastically. "I'll never get used to Stephen King walking through that door. You know we're eternally grateful." Stevie smiled. "Well, I'm here to deliver a new one for you." He handed over the manuscript for Misery along with a worn typewriter ribbon. "It's about my #1 fan who holds me captive and forces me to write," Stevie explained with a smirk. Hatlund leafed through, whistling. "This is juicy, and I see you typed it old school." Stevie nodded. Felt appropriate, given the story. Stevie's comeback from his near-fatal accident accelerated in the late 80s. To everyone's surprise, he emerged rejuvenated creatively. The quality of his writing improved markedly. He began exploring new genres like fantasy and mystery, while continuing to produce best-selling horror. Longtime fans remarked that Stevie's voice gained emotional maturity and depth after his brush with death. Now, in his 40s, Stevie enjoyed the benefits of wealth and fame. Though no longer a hard-partying, belligerent wild man, he continued attracting controversy for his boundary-pushing stories. But the truck accident provided perspective. Stevie treasured his family and no longer took success for granted. Tabby remained his stalwart companion, happily avoiding the limelight. "I'm just here to support Stevie's genius and raise our kids," she'd say. Their children Joe, Naomi, and Owen grew into fine adults who indulged their father's eccentricities. And Stevie's tireless muse continued guiding his pen to explore the horrors lurking within human nature. As Stevie departed the press offices, Mike called out, Look forward to your next bestseller." Stevie waved and stepped into the sunset. The long night's journey into day had only begun. Chapter 11. Stevie strolled the aisles of his local Bangor bookshop, pulling titles at random and reading pages to stimulate new ideas. Though comfortably retired, he couldn't resist the itch to create. The shop's proprietor, Ralph Dugan, approached with a grin. "I ought to put you on payroll for the business you drum up. What are you in the mood for today?" Stevie held up a legal thriller. "Thinking of tackling something new for a change, outside my usual. Maybe a courtroom drama?" Dugan nodded approvingly. "Your fans will read anything with your name on it." Stevie needed constant variety, fearing repetition. Departing his usual horror, supernatural and suspense genres recharged his imagination. In his later career, Stevie explored realms from romance to literary fiction, even penning a serialized mystery for television. Critics were startled by his versatility. While respected as a master scribe of the macabre, few expected Stevie to try new styles so adeptly. He quickly proved himself more than a genre writer, capable of inhabiting multiple voices. "I get restless cranking out the same old horrors," Stevie explained. "I write whatever the muse demands." Surprising himself was the reward. Even he couldn't predict what bizarre new narrative his psyche might spawn to astonish readers. Stevie's ear for raw dialogue and eye for human detail brought his characters to life, whatever the genre. Tabby encouraged his creative wanderlust. "Just write the truth," became her mantra. By now, the critics had learned, underestimate Stevie at your peril. If engaged, his imagination knew no bounds. Leaving the shop with an armful of books, Stevie anticipated new vistas to explore. An infinite multiverse of stories swirled within him. He need only listen to the muse's siren song. Chapter 12. Stevie glanced around the crowded grand ballroom, tugging at his bow tie. Despite his fame, he never grew comfortable with the pomp of banquets and ceremonies. Tonight he was the guest of honor at the National Book Awards, where he would receive the Medal for Distinguished Contribution to American Letters. After a flute of champagne to settle his nerves, Stevie took the stage amid thunderous applause. The standing ovation stretched nearly 5 minutes, the audience hooting and whistling their admiration. Stevie stepped to the podium, clearing his throat. "Somewhere my old high school English teacher is keeling over in shock," he began, eliciting laughter from the crowd. "I was no star pupil." He went on to sincerely thank the fans, publishers, and fellow authors who enabled his success. Later, at the after-party, Stevie was mobbed by well-wishers. He exchanged warm greetings with literary icons like Toni Morrison and John Updike, who welcomed him into their prestigious ranks. Such laurels once seemed unthinkable for the lowly son of a washwoman from rural Maine. Among horror authors, only the legendary Edgar Allan Poe could match Stevie's prolific output across novels, stories, essays, and poems. His books sold over 500 million copies worldwide, making him one of the most popular writers of all time in any genre. The king of horror was now enshrined among America's literary giants. Yet Stevie remained the same humble, diligent craftsman from those early days. His gargantuan imagination served something larger, it bringing solace and joy to generations of outcasts and questioners. Sketching the darkness in the human heart was but a means to elicit empathy and remind people of their humanity. Few recognized the sincere idealist behind the master of the macabre persona. When later asked the key to his success, Stevie said simply, right from a genuine place. Through faith in the muse and perseverance, he transformed his love of spooky tales into the stuff of literary legend. Chapter 13. Stevie sipped black coffee, hunched over his desk reviewing fan mail. One embossed envelope stood out. Inside was a letter from Warner Bros. Pictures seeking film rights to his novelette. Stevie leaned back, intrigued. Hollywood had adapted his work before to mixed success, but new techniques like CGI made imaginative films more achievable. He met the producers on the old Derry film lot outside Bangor. They pitched their vision for bringing Pennywise the shape-shifting clown to terrifying life on screen. Stevie was won over. Special effects could finally match the boundless horrors of his imagination. He signed on enthusiastically. When filming wrapped, Stevie was invited to a private early screening. Seeing his characters and settings faithfully recreated stirred a profound joy. The Young Losers Club bonding and battling primordial evil made his eyes well up. Stephen King finally got his Hollywood masterpiece. The film smashed box office records and earned rave reviews. A new generation was introduced to Stephen King's worlds. More Hollywood offers flooded in, seeking to tap his deep well of stories. Stevie marveled at how far his tales could stretch beyond the page, given proper effort and artistry. Overall, he was choosier with adaptations later in life. "The books will always be there," he explained. "Films and shows are just interpretations I don't fret over." But the success of it and other adaptations like The Mist proved his fertile imagination can translate to any medium when handled with care. Long after he ceased writing, Stevie knew his visions would haunt screens small and silver. Seeing his characters come to life enriched his spirit and forged new creative bonds late in life. Because, as with writing, making movies boiled down to just one thing for him: telling meaningful stories that touched people's hearts. Chapter 14. Stevie flipped through the printed galley pages of his latest book, nodding approvingly. On Writing was part memoir, part how-to guide for aspiring authors. After decades mastering his craft, Stevie felt he had worthwhile advice to share. Early chapters covered his impoverished childhood and discovery of storytelling. "Writing fueled my escape from reality," Stevie noted. He recounted formative authors who influenced him, crucial lessons learned, and routine practices that boosted his prolific output. When addressing technique, Stevie stressed fundamentals over fancy prose. A writer's toolbox only needs a few tools: a vocabulary, grammar, and life experience. Master the basics, then say what you must plainly. He urged writers to trust your tale, not yourself. Remaining humble kept him motivated. Inspirational anecdotes illustrated how one good idea could spawn a massive bestseller. Stevie wanted to embolden writers crushed by doubt. "If I did it, anyone can," he maintained. His final pep talk roused the reader to begin creating, right away. On Writing drew raves from critics and fellow legends like Annie Wilkes. "King appeals to the writer in each of us," she wrote. Aspiring authors devoured his folksy, blunt guidance. Stevie found humbling success passing on hard-earned wisdom to the next generation. His accessible voice made masterful writing seem attainable. Fan letters poured in thanking Stevie for the revelations in On Writing. Hearing he rescued others from despair reassured Stevie his long, fruitful career had purpose. Through generosity of spirit, he bettered the writing community that enabled his talents. It remained Stevie's way to give back. Chapter 15. Stevie leaned on his cane, slowly mounting the steps of the University of Maine Literature Building. He was honored as guest speaker at the writing department's annual symposium. Hushdog greeted his arrival. Stevie chuckled, remembering feeling equally awed seeing real authors speak back in college. The lecture hall swelled past capacity with students. When introduced, Stevie received a thunderous standing ovation. He began with humorous anecdotes about his own college days before reading a short story he penned as a freshman. Its clumsy lyricism made students laugh. "We all start as fumbling dreamers," Stevie said. "But with passion and hard work, those dreams can come true." He went on to share lessons from decades mastering the craft, overcoming rejection, fighting past blocks, seeking constant improvement. Students listened raptly, some scribbling notes. In the Q&A session, Stevie addressed every question thoughtfully, ranging from story structure to character development. His warm sincerity and generosity of spirit inspired the crowd. He lingered afterward for book signings and photos until every student left satisfied. The symposium's success was covered widely. As the horror genre's elder statesman and dean of storytelling, Stevie's influence surpassed any active writer. His avuncular mentorship encouraged emerging artists like never before. Fan mail increasingly came from authors who grew up on Stevie's books, crediting him for stoking their imaginations. It gratified Stevie deeply to pay forward the wisdom bestowed by legends before him. When asked why he invested such time mentoring, Stevie said simply, "I teach to learn." Each new generation of writers taught him in return. The cycle enriched literature forevermore. Chapter 16. Another packed crowd greeted Stevie at the Bangor Civic Center on his latest book tour. Promoting new work energized him, even as an octogenarian. This latest novel, Fairy Tale, was a departure into fantasy adventure. Stevie proudly held up an early hardcover, flashing his famous shark grin. "Who's ready for a bedtime story?" he called out. The audience erupted in cheers. At an age when most contemplated retirement, Stevie summoned the drive for another lengthy novel. His tireless work ethic never faltered. The familiar rituals soothed Stevie's spirit. Pre-signed books stacked high, superfans in homemade costumes, kindred spirits gathered to meet their literary hero. This was home. He plunged into the crowd, clasping hands and trading quips. Stevie cherished these bonds more than fame. Even as times changed, his books sold better than ever. A new film or television adaptation came nearly every year, introducing fresh followers. Decades of unmated quality kept Stevie's audience expanding. Many peers slowed output with age, struggling to recapture old magic. But Stevie's childlike creativity seemed endless. He awoke each morning riffing new plots, scribbling down ideas. Retirement was never an option. Writing remained oxygen, life's truest pleasure. Now entering his 5th decade as an author, Stevie marveled at his blessed longevity. Even he couldn't fully explain the perpetual font of imagination within. Divining stories was a magical, mysterious act he never took for granted. When fans asked how much longer he planned to write, Stevie winked. "Until they nail my coffin shut." He was only halfway up the Dark Tower. Chapter 17. Stevie stacked the completed manuscript of The Dark Tower 7, The Dark Tower, with reverence. After 30 years, his magnum opus neared completion. What began as a vague vision grew into a 2,000-page saga spanning multiple worlds and genres. The story's protagonist, Roland the Gunslinger, became Stevie's alter ego, an immortal knight warring with fate. As a young man, Stevie envisioned only telling the first tale of Roland, pursuing the eldritch man in black across a desert wasteland. But the siren call of the mythical Dark Tower proved too irresistible over the decades, spurring 7 sequels. Stevie amazed even himself, sustaining this epic narrative over so many years. Between novels, he forever dropped cryptic hints toward the grand design at play. Now at last the final pieces click together, revealing the awe-inspiring scope. No single volume could contain the story's ambition. The magical realism, high fantasy, metafiction, and cosmic horror melded into a uniquely mind-blowing saga unlike any in literature. Stevie's passion project ascended to timeless art. As satisfying as reaching the finish line felt, bidding farewell to Roland and his ka-tet saddened Stevie. They were old friends who walked beside him throughout life's journey. But he took solace knowing their quest for meaning and redemption would inspire readers eternally. Stevie hoped the Dark Tower saga would stand as his creative peak, the masterwork summing his literary lifetime. He aimed to leave a bold footprint showing where he walked across these many worlds. As Roland would say, he had reached the clearing at the end of his path. Chapter 18. Stevie scrawled his signature atop a large cardboard check before holding it up for the cheering crowd. The funds would bolster literacy programs in local Maine schools. Though now a global icon, Stevie never forgot his hardscrabble roots. He seized every chance to improve life in his beloved home state. From the earliest days of success, Stevie funneled large portions of his wealth toward philanthropy. He sponsored scholarships allowing disadvantaged youths to attend college, knowing education could uplift lives. The local radio station, library, art museum, and Little League teams relied on Stevie's regular generosity to operate. But donating money alone seemed hollow to Stevie. He cultivated deep bonds, visiting classrooms, libraries, and charity events. His big heart and sincerity put recipients at ease. Speaking with poor and marginalized folks, Stevie remembered the hope stories once kindled in him. Activism formed another crucial pillar. Stevie championed progressive values through speeches, essays, and endorsements. He advocated fiercely for LGBTQ and minority rights, gun control, campaign finance reform, and protecting the environment. Some critics chided him for mixing politics with art, but Stevie ignored their gripes. Writing brings power, and power brings responsibility, he often said. Stevie used his platform to champion equality and justice however possible. His integrity earned greater respect than all the trophies and honorary degrees combined. The homeless shelters, conservation areas, and social programs, bolstered by Stevie's wealth and spirit, paid tributes to his principles. Compassion matched only by his imagination made him a true national treasure. Chapter 19. A film student raised her hand during the Q&A. How do you wish your work to be remembered after you're gone? Stevie pondered, absently petting his Maine Coon cat on his lap. Even he occasionally reflected on his legacy. I hope I'm remembered as a storyteller who made the ineffable terrors of life a little more tangible and brought solace to those who feel alone, he responded. Stevie's bibliography contained over 60 novels, 200 short stories, and numerous scripts and poems. Add in countless essays, reviews, and letters, and his full body of work was staggering. Though dismissed by some critics as a pop horror merchant, academics increasingly recognized the literary merit of his oeuvre. Stevie tackled the human condition with nuance while appealing to the masses. His gift for probing darkness spoke to a deep psychic vein. In one life, Stevie created countless indelible worlds, people, nightmares, and dreams. His fertile imagination knew few bounds. Fans found solace in Stevie's uncanny grasp of fears and fantasies lurking within every heart. Some tones like The Shining, It, and Misery entered the canon of great American novels. Stories like The Body and Different Seasons revealed literary range. And the Dark Tower saga cemented his reputation for boundary-pushing genius. No one understands the fundamentally weird nature of existence better than Stephen King, remarked one critic. Even his pulpiest tales upheld sincerity in exploring humanity's inner shadows. Future generations would debate which ghost story, epic or thriller, best defined his legacy. But the breadth and resonance of Stevie's imagination were undeniable. Through faith in his vision, he brought wondrous new realities to life. Chapter 20. A book blogger had asked Stevie via email to explain his enduring appeal after so many decades. He tapped his chin, pondering the question deeply as thunder rumbled outside. Stevie's popularity never waned, even as he entered the twilight of his career. He remained a ubiquitous bestseller and multimedia brand. Clearly, his literary works continued gripping readers on some primal level. But what exactly was the source of this timelessness? Perhaps it arose from the vast scope of his imagination. Stevie built entire worlds teeming with vivid life. His fiction ranged effortlessly from gothic horror to gritty crime, magical fantasy to apocalyptic sci-fi. He probed the light and dark all human experience offers. Or maybe it was his candor addressing fears and desires long suppressed in polite society. Stevie gazed unflinchingly at human nature's heart of darkness. His stories resonated with those who felt alienated and afraid. He dragged private demons into the light. His underdog background struck a chord given his fame. Despite unimaginable success, Stevie never lost his humble working-class roots. Fans trusted his sincerity when exposing society's shadows. Whatever the exact alchemy, Stevie's writing touched an eternal nerve. Like Lovecraft and Poe before him, his singular imagination accessed the sublime and terrifying forces churning beneath reality's placid surface. Stevie gave shape to horrors and wonders lurking in our collective unconscious. Stories timeless in their primal power to move the human heart. In the end, his appeal was simple as Stevie understood people's unspoken pains and hopes like few others. He crafted compelling tales, exploring the depths of human experience. Readers saw themselves reflected in his flawed, relatable characters. People always crave such empathy. By sharing his personal demons, Stevie reminded society of our shared bonds. Through the power of story, he made audiences feel less alone. And that timeless magic persisted in every line he wrote, whatever the genre or style. Because Stevie always respected the craft, never losing beginner's hunger. He honored the art of honest storytelling. The fountain of creativity flowed from sincerity. Each new story was a chance to uplift and inspire. As long as humanity craves meaning, Stevie's work satisfying that need would find readers. Though the years passed, his youthful passion endured, and his immortal tales stayed vital, haunting, and human. Chapter 21. The fall New England sunset bathed Stevie's writing shack in golden light as he sat typing the final pages of a new novel. Nearly a century old, his output never slowed. Even facing mortality, the urge to create propelled him. Having explored every conceivable horror and dreamscape, Stevie's wellspring of inspiration defied rational limits. Some called his late career works derivative of past triumphs, but Stevie never courted originality for its own sake. He wrote solely to satisfy the muse. His family continued providing ballast as fame grew ever more surreal. Tabby, now Stevie's spouse of 60 years, maintained loving support and wisdom even as age took its toll. Their children and grandchildren visited the Maine estate, often for backyard barbecues and fireside chats. Stevie found inspiration in their growing brood. His wealth and celebrity now transcended literature to a globally iconic status. As the elder statesman of popular storytelling, Stevie received invites to speak at the White House, United Nations, major universities, and more. He declined most, preferring his simple life. Fame was but the means to write in peace. Through it all, Stevie's down-to-earth personality endured. He still enjoyed greeting fans outside book signings, asking about their lives and families as old friends. Nothing thrilled Stevie more than hearing how his tales inspired or comforted readers. The human connections gave his success meaning. Sunset faded to dusk as Stevie concluded his newest manuscript. A good day's work. With time dwindling, he felt only growing urgency to craft every story within him needing telling. As always, he would write until the pen slipped from his grasp. Chapter 22. Candle flames flickered softly, casting dancing shadows over the gathered faces. A hush blanketed the crowded Bangor Memorial Hall, lined with photos of Stevie through the decades. One by one, figures approached the podium sharing memories of the legendary author who passed away peacefully at age 95. Colleagues and protégés, even the state governor and president, offered tearful tributes celebrating his kindness along with literary genius. Most moving were remembrances from average citizens whose lives were impacted profoundly by Stevie's work. Abuse survivors whose eyes he opened to find courage. LGBT youth who overcame torment by bonding with his misfit characters. The father consoled after losing his child by Stevie's ghost stories affirming deeper mysteries of the universe. No one better channeled humanity's inherent weirdness and darkness into art so poignant. Stevie's stories shone light, revealing shared humanity. He honored the outcasts and the afraid, giving voice to their unspoken pain. The daring vulnerability and empathy in his writing fostered connections across barriers of identity. By gazing unflinchingly into the shadows of his own heart, Stevie uplifted multitudes. His family announced one final gift, a charity foundation supporting libraries, literacy, and the arts in Maine, funded generously by Stevie's estate. Its mission would carry on his principles of empowering through education and imagination. When the last speaker finished, the crowd remained seated in reverent silence. After the legacy he left, words seemed inadequate. The moments passed slowly until broken by a lone attendee's vigorous applause. It spread rapidly until all were on their feet, clapping loudly in collective catharsis. The ovation swelled with bittersweet joy and gratitude for everything this beautiful, brilliant dreamer gave to the world. Though gone, Stevie's spirit would live eternally through the immortal worlds he created, haunting reminders of our humanity's endless capacity for light and dark. His stories transformed lives across all generations. Few artists ever touched so many hearts. Stevie's flame would never cease inspiring future storytellers and misfits who felt his works within their souls. For in the end, he accomplished exactly what he hoped, giving voice to the weirdness and wonder of existing. Through the power of imagination, he alleviated a little of humankind's essential loneliness. Millions who felt his empathy in every page would ensure his legacy endure. Stevie proved that skillful storytelling could illuminate and redeem even the darkest of human corners. By shining light on our shared demons, he helped a weary world feel hopeful. The end.